Alright, y'all. So we will get started on chapter 11, Jacksonian Impulse. Let me go ahead and pull this up and shrink myself down to about right there. Sorry about that. Alright, so there we go. Jacksonian Impulse, y'all. The first slide on here says the election of 1828. We've already covered that, but here we are, chapter 11, y'all. Jacksonian Impulse. Y'all, hopefully this audio is a little bit better than the last one. I tried to kind of go back to where I was before, so we'll see what happens. Alright, so again, we've already talked about the election of 1828, so let's move on to what we're really picking up here in chapter 11. Okay. Our general notions, as usual. In 1828, the U.S. had 24 states and approximately 13 million people. The common man was on the rise, especially in politics, y'all. That's something we're going to see, and I'll talk about it a little bit with Andrew Jackson. But Andrew Jackson brings in this idea of one of the ways that he campaigned against John Quincy Adams was that Andrew Jackson was the common man. John Quincy Adams was this rich elitist guy who had grew up and around Boston. His dad was president. He spent a lot of time overseas, hanging out with kings and queens in Europe and stuff like that. Jackson says that John Quincy Adams doesn't know what it's like to be a common man, whereas Andrew Jackson says, I know all about it. I was born and raised in the foothills of the Appalachian Mountains. Like all around North Carolina, South Carolina, Tennessee, Kentucky, the backwoods regions of America. I know exactly what it's like to be a frontiersman, to be a common man, to not be some rich elitist who went to elite Ivy League schools. So he plays up on that. So we see the rise of the common man because Jackson will become the president, all the people who he tried to get to identify with him, they now start to really become more active. So more people are going to take risks to make money. Y'all, this created a diverse social structure with haves and have-nots. Y'all, basically what we're seeing is that more people are taking risks. More people are gambling with their future in many ways. Y'all, think about it. When you gamble, when you place a bet on something, if you win, you make way more money, right? You make more money than what you had. So you got $5, you put it down, you place your bet, you win the bet, hey, you get maybe $10 back instead of just the $5. But if you lose the bet, you lose your $5, right? So we get a diverse social structure with a bunch of haves and have-nots. So a bunch of people are ultimately going to win their bets and a bunch of people are going to lose their bets. So a lot of people are taking risks. We get a diverse social structure with haves and have-nots. In many ways the world got bigger. Not physically, obviously, but in a lot of ways the world got bigger. People grew larger crops to sell to growing markets, and areas developed regional specializations. So what we see is that more people are now realizing, look, I can have a bigger farm, I can grow a bigger crop because I can sell it to those people and those people and those people. I'm not just selling it to my little neighborhood anymore. I can sell it to a large area. And so what that does is now regions of the country get regional specializations. So certain areas of the country will become dominant. Think about it, y'all, in South Louisiana. What's our regional specialization as far as crops? Sugarcane, right? So we see that those regional specializations become dominant, okay? Many local banks had problems. Andrew Jackson went bankrupt more than once. That's something we'll talk about more when we get to the banks, but understand that a lot of local banks have problems. Many get out of personal farms and went towards industry, and we start to see a separation of an industrial society and an agricultural society. So this idea of, I got a small little farm, I grow enough for me and my family, and I grow a little extra so I can trade with the 4 other farmers in town who all grow something different. Well, what happens is that as people start to get these regional specializations, they're not having their small little personal farm. They're getting these big large farms
a lot of small farmers. So if you had four people, imagine you got an intersection, right? On the four corners, you had four different farms. Well, the four farmers would all grow their own little crop and probably trade with one another, right? Well, now what happens is that people want these regional specializations. They recognize all this different stuff. And so one person's going to buy out his other three neighbors, and he's going to plant one crop on all four of the farms. And those three other families, they up and left, and they move to a town, and they start getting involved in industry. They get away from farming. So we get regional specializations and people leaving the farming. So again, farming goes from small subsistence farming to large farms and large industry. Okay. Now, some political changes. More and more states moved away from property restrictions and started giving white male suffrage. So we start to see a point where a lot of you used to have to be a church member. Then it became you had to own property. Now we're seeing more and more states move away from property restrictions and start giving white male suffrage. Why? Well, it's real simple. The property restrictions were not just, you had to own any property. You had to own substantial property. But now what happens? That example I just gave you of the four farmers all living at an intersection. Well, what happens? Three of them sold out. So now they live in a city renting an apartment or renting a house. Well, that's not property ownership in the level that it used to be. So they went from being able to vote to now they're not able to vote. So now we start to get rid of some of those restrictions on property ownership. People wanted more democracy and less rule by the elite. That common man, they want more democracy. They're getting rid of people like John Quincy Adams, these people who have these elite backgrounds, and bringing in these people who don't necessarily have those elite backgrounds. Not saying they're bad, but don't have that prestige, don't have that what you would call pedigree, right? John Quincy Adams came from a family that was well known, that was well established. Andrew Jackson doesn't come from that, and we see that trend starting to build. Okay, so they wanted more democracy, more people being involved, less ruled by the elite. This helped create stable but hardline political parties. What we're going to see is that these political parties that are coming in now are ultimately going to become much more stable than what we saw in the past with the Federalists and the Republicans. But they're also going to become more fixated and more hardlined in what they do. They're going to become much more, this is who we are, this is our party, this is what we believe, and you won't change it, right? So we start to see that idea. They get more stable, but they also become less flexible in their beliefs, right? Most of the common men, most of the people who would classify themselves as a common man, they're going to follow Jackson into the Democratic Party. Because most of them are going to be simple farmers, mechanics, laborers. Okay? Now, we also see that they opposed burdens in government and a national bank. So they wanted to reduce government. They didn't want a government that was overly involved. They opposed the burdens in government and the national bank. Okay? So that brings us to Jackson's presidency. Let's sit down and talk about what he is, what he did, who he was, right? So Jackson was hard-nosed and war weather. He was simple yet complex. Jackson's a really interesting figure, y'all, because he's a simple person, but yet he does things that at times make you go, huh? Why would he do that? So he seems simple, and in many cases he is. He's very direct, very straightforward. He's very simple, but some of his beliefs can be a bit contradictory at times, and you have to look at him through a certain lens. If you look at him in this way, if you look at them at face value, they don't make sense. But if you look at them through the right set of glasses, if you will, they'll start to make sense. Okay? So Jackson was hard-nosed. He's war-weather. He's fought in a lot of battles. He's a very physically imposing character. He's a person who doesn't back down from anything. He's never thought of as a coward. Jackson was involved in many duels. He's involved in many combat battles. The dude is no stranger to confrontation. Okay, so Jackson was hard-nosed, war-weathered, simple yet complex. He's extremely passionate, which is awesome. but it's also his biggest flaw. Jackson's passion can easily be seen as his biggest flaw because he often let his emotions rule him, and he ruled often with an iron fist and as a tyrant. Jackson will get a negative nickname named King Andy or King Andrew the First, right? So a lot of times Jackson has his beliefs, and it's my way or the highway when he's in control. And so when we see that come to power, Jackson lets his emotions in. As we saw with his wife's death and the rumors that were spread about he and his wife. Jackson never forgives, he never forgets. He wears his emotions on his sleeve, and oftentimes those emotions control his actions. And so sometimes letting our emotions control us is not always the best thing to do. Yeah, we want to have emotion and we want to be driven by emotion at times. But sometimes when you're making decisions that impact thousands, maybe millions of people, being the President of the United States, maybe not all of your decisions should be emotionally driven or should be emotionally charged, right? So we have to consider those sorts of things. Now, Jackson came to power hoping to restore America to the ideals of Thomas Jefferson. Okay? He wanted to restore America to the ideals of Thomas Jefferson. He believed the nation had been corrupted by the elite, and he wanted to get rid of this. Okay? He thought people like John Quincy Adams were too elitist and they had corrupted America. Jefferson had these ideas of the simple American farmer, and Jackson tries to bring some of that back. Okay? He also wanted to minimize the government, lower tariffs, cut spending, and get rid of the Indians so whites could use the land. Okay, so again, he wanted to minimize government, lower taxes, cut spending, and get rid of the natives so that whites could use their land. But that's not all, Jackson's going to bring in the spoil system. Maybe you've heard the phrase, to the victor go the spoils, right? Whoever wins gets to kind of choose what they want to do. Well, that's what we see here, Jackson brings in the spoil system for his party. The winner chooses his own new people. So now Jackson won, and what he's going to do is a lot of positions that were appointed, he got rid of a lot of people that were appointed by John Quincy Adams, and he appoints his own. Look, I won. I'm going to bring in my own new people. The spoil system. Okay. He justified this by saying it was democracy, and that turnover is good. Like, we don't want any one person sitting in power for way too long, right? So when people stay in power, they become complacent and they don't really care and they think they're in control of everything. Well, Jackson says that's not good. We need turnover. Turnover makes people work so that they don't get replaced, right? So he says it's democracy, more people getting involved, and ultimately turnover was good. No one person stayed in power too long. But, he doesn't come in and overdo it. He doesn't come in and just get rid of everyone. But what he does do is noticeable. Okay, so he brings in enough people for it to be noticeable. All right, so the kitchen cabinet and the Eaton affair. Now, the Eaton affair is going to roll into Jackson's cabinet, so we'll look at that. Now, in Jackson's official cabinet, the only person he had a decent relationship was Martin Van Buren, who at this point, during his first term, is his Secretary of State. So the only person that he had a decent relationship with was Martin Van Buren. Jackson really used what he called his kitchen cabinet, or his unofficial cabinet. They kind of met in around the kitchen at the White House, so they got the nickname the kitchen cabinet. So he has this official cabinet that's there, but the people he really goes to for advice are going to be some close personal trusted advisors he calls the kitchen cabinet. His cabinet was a lot of people he appointed, but didn't necessarily trust them totally, right? So he uses his kitchen cabinet. Now, his official cabinet, part of the reason why he doesn't always trust some of these people is because of what happens here with the Eaton affair. Andrew Jackson's official cabinet is torn apart in 1831 by none other than a sex scandal. Think about it. We start to look at American society, and I told you, I think I've told you this before at least. If you think modern day politics can get crazy, the 1800s politics were just as outlandish, if not more so. American politics, there's a sex scandal. And we're kind of like, okay, that sort of stuff was happening back here in the 1800s. It's not new, okay? So, Andrew Jackson's official cabinet is torn apart in 1831 by a sex scandal centered around this woman by the name of Margaret Eaton. Her name, oftentimes a nickname for people with the name Margaret, is Peggy. So Peggy Eaton, and Eaton is her married name, right? So Peggy Eaton is pretty, she's outspoken. Again, some outspoken, maybe not necessarily the most trendy thing to do for women at the time, but she's pretty, she's outspoken. She worked at her father's tavern and hotel. And she was friends with many high officials. It was a tavern that was frequented by people like Jackson and some of the members of his cabinet. And so she befriends a lot of these people. She becomes friends with people who are high-ranking government officials. Andrew Jackson, she even married his Secretary of War, John Eaton. That's how she gets the last name Eaton, right? So Jackson's Secretary of War and Jackson become friends with Peggy. Ultimately, Peggy marries the Secretary of War, John Eaton, and whatnot. Now, why does that matter? Well, here's why. John Eaton is not her first marriage, or not her first husband. Her first marriage ended when that husband died of suicide. So her first husband died of suicide. Okay, so she marries another person. Again, where's the scandal? Here's where it comes in. Her first marriage ended when her sailor husband died of suicide. Rumors start that he committed suicide because of her infidelity, that she had been cheating on him, and that led him to commit suicide. Now, y'all, think back. What were the rumors about Andrew Jackson, right? As he's running for president, the issue that he and his wife Rachel had committed adultery. Here, a friend of his, John Eaton, and his wife Peggy are going through another similar thing where rumors are starting to fly around. So rumors start that he did it because of her infidelity. Now the other wives of cabinet members start insulting her and ostracizing her. A lot of that is going to be led by John Calhoun's wife. John Calhoun is the vice president. So in essence, we have the second lady, John Calhoun's wife, Floride. Now, think about that. She's technically the second lady, but in essence, she's kind of the first lady because Andrew Jackson's wife has passed away, right? So it's this weird dynamic where the vice president's wife is spreading rumors, or like really leading the charge of spreading rumors and ostracizing a member of the cabinet, or a member of the cabinet's wife, right? So it's this really, really interesting dynamic. It leads to a lot of infighting. So, we start to see things where, like, the cabinet won't get together for little things because they all disagree. The cabinet members are like, oh, okay, we have a business meeting, get through it, and John's like, all right, guys, why don't we go back to Peggy's dad's place, have a few drinks, sit back, we can chill, relax. And those other cabinet members are like, no, man, I'm gonna go home, because they know what? Their wives are back home saying, you best not be hanging out with that woman, right? Because all the rumors about her cheating on her husband and all these different things. So it leads to a lot of infighting within the cabinet. Now, Andrew Jackson tells his cabinet to play nice. Andrew Jackson he's like, stop all this foolishness. Be nice, let's be, we have jobs to do. Okay, so Jackson tells his cabinet to play nice. Martin Van Buren is not married, so he takes up a friendship with Peggy and John Eaton. But the rest of the cabinet don't. And actually, most of his cabinet will resign. This is something that really helps Martin Van Buren later on. It's going to lead to him eventually becoming vice president and then president on his own, because here he's developing that good relationship. Jackson asks the cabinet to play nice, and Martin Van Buren, again, doesn't have a wife back home telling him, hey, you best not be hanging out with that woman. So he takes up the friendship that makes Jackson like him, develops a good relationship. It's really going to help. It's really going to help Martin Van Buren moving forward. Okay. So let's talk about a couple other things, y'all. Internal improvements and nullification. So we get back to some official business. Andrew Jackson hated the federal government aiding local internal improvements. He hated the federal government aiding local internal improvements. So, if something is going to be a statewide, or if something's going to be a multi-state initiative, Jackson might be okay with that. But he absolutely hates the national government paying for something that's only going to be in one state. He hates it helping in local internal improvements. Okay? So when John Calhoun and Henry Clay proposed the Maysville Road Bill, Jackson vetoes it because it was only in Kentucky, not multiple states. Jackson saying the U.S. government is not going to pay for a road to be built in Kentucky. If that road crossed state lines and connected 2 states or 3 states or something like that, if it was more than just a local issue, I would maybe support it. But because it is only in Kentucky, he vetoes the Maysville Road Bill. Okay? Yo, this set the precedent that the government would not support every transportation idea. And that allowed early railroad lines to be financed by the state and private industry. Yo, think about it. Railroads. Who controls them? Like, yo, roads in our life, in our world. Roads are controlled by who? The government, right? Like, they are paid for. Very rarely do you see sometimes you see private roads, but roads are managed and operated and built by the government, whether it's the local government, the state government, national government. That's how it works. Well, y'all, this Maysville Road Bill that Jackson vetoes actually sets the precedent that the government will get involved in every internal improvement. And so we start to see things like railroad industry. Well, that means private businesses or maybe states can get involved in it. Also, think about things in our modern world, y'all. Railroads. Not railroads even in modern day, but also airports. Y'all, think about that. That's not necessarily government run. At least not the airlines, right? Maybe the airport is run by the government, but the actual companies that do the traveling, those airline companies are private industries. Okay, so we start to see that kind of get pushed through here. Now, that brings us to nullification and the concept of the tariff, or the tariff of 1828 and the concept of nullification. Okay? After the Maysville Road Bill, y'all, we get big problems. A tariff had been passed in 1828. In the South, they refer to it as the tariff of abomination. Remember, y'all, the South generally doesn't like tariffs because what does the South make? Their crop. They have to buy everything else. So the South doesn't like tariffs. They really hate this one of 1828. They call it the tariff of abomination. The South hated this, and South Carolina Senator Robert Hayne condemned it and said the state could nullify or repeal a federal law it believed was unjust. So this is where we're getting the Webster-Hayne debate. Y'all, Robert Hayne, senator from South Carolina, said basically, y'all, the states made the Constitution, so you know what? The states can void a federal law. The U.S. can make a law, and South Carolina can say, no, that's a crappy law, we don't agree with it, and we're not going to follow it. That's what he's saying. He's saying the states made the Constitution, and so people can, the state can void a federal law. The state can say that federal law doesn't apply in our state because we don't agree to it. We disapprove of it. We nullify it, right? If you make something null and void, it has no power, right? So that's what they're talking about. But then Daniel Webster says, no, you're wrong. The people create the Constitution. Remember the Constitution? How does it begin? Does it begin with the states? No, it begins with we the people. But I think I may have told y'all this before. There was a debate over how that Constitution should be written. When Madison starts to write, it says we the states. But then it gets changed to we the people. So these things, y'all, that's where it becomes tricky because how people interpret things, right? But Webster says, no, you're wrong. The people create the Constitution, and the Supreme Court decides if it's legal. So y'all, we're still fighting over this issue. Who gets to decide whether something's legal or not? Is it the states or is it the Supreme Court? So Supreme Court, or Webster says, no, you're wrong. The people create the Constitution, and the Supreme Court decides if it's legal. So the federal government is higher than the state. Again, what we saw before. Federal government is supreme. The Constitution and its creations are supreme and sovereign. That's what Webster is saying here. John Calhoun, again, y'all, John Calhoun is the vice president to Jackson. John Calhoun sides with Hayne in South Carolina. But Jackson, the president, sides with Webster because he feels the federal government is supreme over the states. Jackson is not going to be a guy who's just going to be like, oh yeah, let's give the states all the power. They can do whatever they want. No, Jackson's in control. Remember, his way or the highway. So Jackson believes that the federal government is stronger than the states, so he sides with Webster. Yo, that's going to enhance the problems between Jackson and Calhoun. Remember, I told you Jackson during that Adams O'Meara Treaty when Jackson went down to Florida and was supposed to just capture some criminals, but really he started like a little mini war. Well, remember who was his boss at the time? John Calhoun. Well, John Calhoun didn't really like that. He kind of started some bad blood, not a ton, but now that they're president and vice president, it really starts to boil over. And John Calhoun remembers that stuff. John Calhoun and Andrew Jackson are not getting along at this point. So Andrew Jackson soon got rid of all Calhoun supporters in his cabinet and offices. Yo, Andrew Jackson cannot fire his vice president. He can't do that. They were elected together. But he can get rid of everybody else in his cabinet or any of the office that agreed with Calhoun. And he does so. He gets rid of all these people. Even though he can't get rid of Calhoun. But what can he do, y'all? I think I may have mentioned this to you before, but if I haven't, I'll mention it now. One of the things I remember from my government 101 class that I took with Dr. Faisal, some of you may have had him, but he always made the comment that the vice president is as important as the president wants him to be. You think Andrew Jackson wants John Calhoun to be important right now? No. So John Calhoun, as vice president, is sitting around with basically nothing to do. All of his friends, all of the people who had power, who had some sort of voice in the government, have now been kicked out by Jackson. So what does John Calhoun do? He resigns from the vice presidency and becomes a senator for South Carolina, so he can go to Congress and fight the issues there. So South Carolina was really upset with the tariff, and they threatened to leave the Union. No, I told you. The Civil War isn't the only time people talk about leaving the Union. The Hartford Convention during the War of 1812, it happens there. Here we're seeing South Carolina threatening to leave the Union. So Calhoun resigns from the vice presidency, becomes a South Carolina senator to fight the issues in Congress. South Carolina was now really upset with the tariff, and they threatened to leave the Union. Andrew Jackson sends troops to South Carolina, but nothing major happens. Why? Because Clay strikes another bargain. Okay. Nothing really happens because Clay strikes another bargain. Y'all, I told you, Henry Clay, the Band-Aid man of America, right? The great compromiser. So Clay comes to the rescue again and settles it with the compromised tariff of 1833. Okay, so the tariff of 1833, or known as the compromised tariff of 1833, it what settles this nullification issue. You know, it gradually reduced the tariff rate. So the tariff was really high, it gradually reduces it, so everybody's kind of okay. But Congress also passed the Force Bill. The Force Bill authorized the president to use force if needed to collect federal taxes. So they are now saying, Congress said, the president can use force. He can use the military if needed to collect federal taxes. He can do that if he wants. Well, what happens is that, just kind of for the heck of it, and just to say, screw you, South Carolina nullifies the Force Bill. They say, no, you can't do that either. But because of Clay's compromise, Andrew Jackson didn't need to use force. So everything quiets down a little bit because both sides feel somewhat victorious. Again, y'all, that's a sign of a good compromise. When both sides feel like they got something, they were somewhat victorious. So South Carolina nullifies the tariff of abomination. That leads to big issues. Jackson's getting ready to use force to collect taxes, but we are sending troops down. We don't know what's going to happen. South Carolina's threatening to leave. In comes Henry Clay, strikes another deal, compromise tariff of 1833. Because of that, everything settles down. The U.S. government says, no, we can force, the president can use force to collect taxes, but South Carolina says, no, you can't, but we never really get a big issue because everything kind of settles down, right? Okay. So, a couple pictures real quick, y'all. Got John Calhoun there on the left, Henry Clay on the right, y'all. Picture of John Calhoun is not really the best because this comes a lot later in life. The one of Henry Clay is done when he's young. That's a portrait. The one on the left of John Calhoun is actually a picture. But y'all, I love the picture of John Calhoun. For the simple fact that y'all, that dude looks crazy, right? And I bring this up because he reminds me of somebody. If you've ever watched the movie series Back to the Future, John Calhoun reminds me of Doc Brown, Dr. Emmett Brown, from that. And that's just me, y'all. And I'm sorry that I'm bringing this up and wasting your time, but I have never in my entire life, as an instructor, as a teacher in any way, shape, or form, taught an American history class where I didn't mention Back to the Future. So now I have fulfilled that requirement. I am good to go. Thank you very much. We can move on. And unfortunately, we move on to racism in Jacksonian America. It's something that we have to understand, we have to deal with, we have to kind of pay attention to. I was just trying to pause for just a second.